Finding a treehouse is most kids' fondest wish. But sometimes, you should be careful what you wish for. Welcome to Psychomanteum. I'm Karen Shaw. Here we venture into the other side of the mirror. Paranormal mysteries, scary stories, and all things supernatural. If that sounds like your jam, and if you like what you hear, please drop a like so we can grow. Now, gather round, everyone. When I was 7 or 8, around 2010 or so, my mom and I moved to a new town a couple hours from where I was born. Remote work was just starting to be a thing, and the houses were cheaper in this area, so my mom could afford one as a single mom. I know, those were the days, right? The house she bought was small and right on a rural route, but it backed up to an extensive area of woods. To say I was excited to move somewhere with space where I could run and play with our black shepherd mix Jolie would be a huge understatement. We'd lived in the city before, and it had been pretty much concrete everywhere. I hadn't even had that many friends, since our building had mostly old people. Anyway, as soon as we moved and got unpacked, I was ready to explore. My mom had to get to work the next day, but she let me drag her out of the house and toward the woods. There was a faint trail leading inside, and we followed it, with Jolie making looping circles around us, her tongue hanging out in the summer heat, clearly having the time of her life. After walking about 15 minutes, we came to a massive tree with thick, drooping branches. My mom said she thought it was a beech tree, because she'd had one in her yard growing up. Whatever it was, it had the dream of every child built between its wide trunk and sturdy branches. A tree house. Of course, where my eyes saw a castle, my mom saw a death trap. With the clear eyes of adulthood, I have to admit the day we found it, it was in rough shape. Boards were missing, and the boards that weren't missing were gray and weathered, with long time exposure to the elements. That treehouse had been out there a long time. My mom is a hardcore realist, and I'm sure she realized telling a young boy not to come to a treehouse in the woods was as good as asking to be lied to. She probably figured it was better if she knew where I was, so she examined the treehouse in depth, pulling at the boards, climbing up herself to make sure the boards tacked to the tree as a ladder were secure and that the platform could hold me, etc. Finally, she dropped to the ground, fixed me with a hard stare, and made me promise to never come out here without telling her, and to always bring Jolie with me. It might seem a bit lax for her to trust me to be safe with only a dog for protection, but when I was about 4, we'd been on a walk with Jolie in the city. My mom had been tying her shoe at the curb, having told me to hold on to the stroller she used to carry me when I got tired. As an only child to a single mother, I usually listened really well, but this day I caught sight of some colorful balloons across the street. Thankfully, the light hadn't changed yet because I took off across the crosswalk, making a beeline for the balloons. As my mom tells it, there was no way she could make it before traffic started to cross, so she sent Jolie after me, which turned out to be a good call, because some man tried to take me by the arm as soon as I got across. To be fair, his reasons could have been to help, but to Jolie it didn't matter. She got between me and him and backed me up against the building. Every time he tried to grab me, she growled and bared her teeth, bouncing a little on her front feet, as if she would charge. My mom said he seemed to get the idea and backed off. My mom was across the street as soon as it was safe, and after that she had complete faith in Jolie to protect me. Anyway, we walked a bit further into the woods, maybe a mile or so, my mom noting there was really no way to get lost as it backed up to several housing developments, and then, getting hungry for dinner, we turned around and went home. The next day, I ran back to the treehouse with Jolie after breakfast. I was eager to fix it up. My mom probably figured it was a good opportunity for me to brush up on my writing and math with school being out for another month, and sent me with a pad of paper and a pencil, telling me that if I wanted to use that rickety old thing, as she called it, I would need to fix it up. She said if I brought a list back before noon, she would take me to Mickey D's and then to the hardware store before she had to get back to work. Being in second grade, I could write, but my handwriting wasn't all that great. Still, I managed to make a list of what I needed to fix the outside and then climbed up to see what was needed inside. Jolie wasn't too happy about being left out, and she barked like crazy. The treehouse wasn't super high, so I added materials to make a ramp to the list. My mom had showed me the library when she was thinking of moving here, and I knew from school it probably had a book I could use to show me how to build one. That was how we did it in the days before YouTube tutorials. Plans made, I spent the rest of the morning imagining various identities for the treehouse, from pirate ship to spaceship, and playing with Jolie until about 11:30. Then I ran home. We had a great time at lunch, enjoying our burgers and nuggets, and my mom even squeezed in a visit to the library before the hardware store. By 2, I was back at the treehouse and ready to get started. My mom had showed me how to use the wheelbarrow the former owner had left. That wasn't the only thing they had left, but that's a story for another time. And I brought a load of supplies. As much as I wanted to get started on the treehouse itself, I wanted my dog with me, so I pulled out the library book we'd found and started on Jolie's ramp. Being pretty young, I got tired kind of quick, so I only worked in fits and starts, taking millions of little breaks to run around with Jolie or read the books I'd brought. I was a huge fan of Junie B. Jones at the time. I spent the whole day at the treehouse, only breaking for dinner and running straight back after promising to be home before sunset. This being late July, that left me until after 8:30. I pulled out another piece of the lumber we'd had pre-cut at the hardware store and managed another row of Jolie's ramp. Hammering wore me out quickly, but I was close to done. I really wanted to finish, but I just didn't have it in me. I stacked up the remaining lumber in a neat pile, played with Jolie for a while, and headed home. The next morning, I raced out to the treehouse with Jolie at my heels and stopped dead in my tracks. Jolie nudged my hand with her cold nose, but I ignored her. The stack of lumber I had piled up to finish my ramp was gone. My throat was suddenly bone dry with fear. I spun around, searching for a threat, my pulse thundering in my ears. I was a pretty brave kid, but the idea that someone had come out here and stolen my lumber terrified me. It wasn't like I thought there was no one around, but I figured anyone who came out at night to steal wood was probably a teenager or an adult, and if they were stealing things, they were probably a bad guy. Then I had a thought. Maybe they hadn't come out at night. Maybe I had just missed them. Or worse, maybe they were still there. It was hard to get enough air to speak. I put my hand on Jolie's warm back, taking comfort in her presence, and squeaked out, "Hello? Is there anyone here?" As I listened for an answer, my heart skittered in my chest like a mouse I'd held once at a pet store. The summer breeze stirred the trees, crickets chirped. A creaking noise near the treehouse made me flinch, but it was just the large tree's limbs moving against each other. There was no answer. My heart rate slowing, I called out a second time, but again, no one replied or stepped out where I could see them. As my fear ebbed, I got mad. I couldn't believe someone had stolen my stuff. I kicked the dirt. Jolie must have taken the movement as an invitation to play, because she galloped around me in wide circles and then around the tree. I shook my head at the goofy dog and, trying to shake off my fear and anger, scooped up a stick to throw for her. She caught it and dropped it at the base of the tree. I walked forward to pick it up and caught sight of the partially built ramp I'd left leaning against the tree on the backside, where it fit perfectly between two boughs. Except the ramp wasn't partially built anymore. It was finished. Whoever had taken the lumber hadn't stolen it. They'd used it to finish the ramp. I stood there for a minute, trying to process this turn of events. Could my mom have finished it? No way. She was way too much into encouraging me to learn stuff. I was sure she was happy for me to have a project to keep me occupied in the outdoors while school was out. Besides, I just couldn't imagine her coming out here at night to build a ramp. Anyway, anyone who helped fix up a treehouse couldn't be a bad guy. Looking back, this kind of thinking was pretty dangerous, but at the time that conclusion blew all my worry away. I wasted no time thinking about the Good Samaritan and quickly set up the ramp so Jolie could join me in the treehouse. All the lumber I had brought yesterday was used up, so I played with my action figures all day, deciding to bring the wheelbarrow back with more supplies tomorrow. After dinner, I spent so much time engrossed in a Star Wars novelization I got at the book fair last year that I was shocked to see the sun setting through the trees. I quickly snatched up my action figures and stuffed them in my pockets, then dropped to the ground and ran home. It was only later in the bathtub that I realized I didn't have my favorite Obi-Wan and Darth Maul figures. The next morning, I couldn't wait to get out of the treehouse. I was hoping to find my action figures, and I was also eager to see if whoever finished my ramp would be there, which, as an adult, yikes, but I was a kid. When I got there, I dropped the handles of the wheelbarrow and stared in shock. I had been scanning the ground on the way to the treehouse in case I dropped my toys along the way home last night, but hadn't found them, so I had expected them to be on the floor of the treehouse where I'd been playing with them yesterday. Instead, they were balanced on the limb that cupped the left side of the treehouse, posed in a little fighting scene. There was no way they could have fallen like that. For one thing, they were on a part of the limb that rose higher than my chest when I was standing in the door. For another, it was a couple feet away from the door. If they had fallen when I was going out the door, they would have landed on the ground. Someone had placed them like that. I don't know why this scared me so much. After all, I had been eager to meet whoever fixed the ramp. Maybe my survival instincts had kicked in, but I froze, staring at the figures, my breathing fast enough to move my body a little. A chill ran up my back. If someone had placed them, they might still be here. A palpable sense of threat rolled over me. I called to Jolie, who was waiting for me to bring out the ramp for her. She scrabbled with her front paws against the trunk, and I calmed down a little. She would have alerted if there were someone around. My pulse slowed a little. Still, I couldn't help feeling like I wasn't alone. My scalp prickled as I searched around for something that could have caused the feeling, but there was nothing. Finally, hoping to shed the pall that had fallen over me, I grabbed some lumber and immersed myself in filling in some of the holes the treehouse had developed over the years. I was lost in the repairs. By lunchtime, I had almost forgotten my fear. I played and read and fixed the day away, only running home for a quick dinner before running back. That night, as I got ready to leave, I thought again about the mystery person who had fixed the ramp and posed my action figures. Distraction had erased my fears, leaving only excited curiosity. Would they come again tonight? I kind of wanted to find a place and hide out to watch, but who knew what time the person would come, and my mother would have a fit if I stayed out after sunset. I also hadn't told her about either event, worried she might decide it was too dangerous to use the treehouse and make the woods off-limits. Still, I really wanted to know if someone came that night, so I purposefully left Obi-Wan and Darth Maul in the treehouse. The next day, they had been posed again, this time in handstands. I laughed, figuring whoever did something that silly must be safe. That night, I had an idea. I left a note for my helper. "Thanks for fixing my ramp," I wrote. "I'm Brett. What's your name?" I left the note and the pencil where someone would be sure to see it and went home. The next morning, I ran to the treehouse and found an answer. It read, "Hi, Brett. I'm Justin." The handwriting wasn't that much better than mine, and I concluded Justin was around my age. Knowing it was another kid erased the slight fear I'd had. That night, I left another note. "Hi, Justin. Want to play?" His answer, "I want to, but I can only play at night." I was disappointed, since I couldn't play at night. That evening, I asked how come he had to play at night. He didn't answer. I was pretty down that day, but I figured he'd just had something else he had to do and couldn't come. I really wanted to meet and play with him, so at lunch I begged my mom to let me sleep at the treehouse that night. She was reluctant, but finally agreed as long as Jolie was with me and I took her cell phone. We still had a landline as well back then. That evening, I gathered a sleeping bag, my pillow, a flashlight, snacks, books, and toys, and my mom helped me carry my stuff out to the treehouse. I was super excited, hoping Justin would show up and also getting to spend the night in the treehouse. Leaning against Jolie, I curled up in my sleeping bag. The door to the treehouse must have faced west because I had a great view of the sunset through the trees. Twilight was long, but soon there was nothing but stars visible. I read for a while, but the whole time I was listening to hear if Justin was coming. Despite eagerly waiting, eventually I fell asleep. When I woke up in the dark, it took me a second to remember where I was. Jolie was sound asleep. My flashlight had dimmed, but I had my mom's cell phone, so I checked the time and saw it was about 2 a.m. I wasn't sure what had woken me, but now that I was awake, I had to pee. I climbed down the ladder and walked away from the treehouse. I thought about running home, but I really had to go, and I didn't want to walk all the way home and all the way back in the dark woods. Still, I shuffled away from the treehouse, looking for a good place. I found a small clump of trees and started to take care of business. As I finished, I realized that the crickets and frogs that created a constant hum on midsummer nights had stopped. The sudden absence of sound made me freeze in my tracks. There must have been some instinctual knowledge that silence in the woods meant the presence of something dangerous, because that eerie feeling I wasn't alone gripped me. I pulled up my pajamas as quickly and quietly as I could, and then just stood there listening, trying to keep my rapid breathing quiet. That crawling feeling on the back of my neck shot down my arms and legs, goosebumps prickling on my forearms and shins. Suddenly, I saw a light a few yards beyond the treehouse, moving away. I knew immediately it was no flashlight. The shape was too diffuse and stretched out vertically. If I had been standing next to it, I think it would have reached from my head down to my ankles. The light made no sound. After about 10 seconds, it vanished. Part of me wanted to run back to the treehouse, but the other part screamed not to move. I was completely hostage to my instincts, my muscles locked with fright. A voice in the back of my head said I was overreacting, that there was a perfectly rational explanation for the light. Moonlight reflecting off mist, headlights from the road, but still I stood there frozen in the dark silence for who knows how long. Finally, as abruptly as it had stopped, the usual nighttime chorus started again. Slowly, the alarm seizing my brain and body released, and I managed to pad back to the treehouse, though my head pivoted left and right the whole way, probing the darkness past the flashlight's dim beam for threats. Back in the treehouse, I scrambled back into my sleeping bag. Jolie lifted her head for a moment, then gave a deep sigh and settled back down. I decided to take her with me if I went out again. I snuggled down in my sleeping bag and tried to get back to sleep. But this time, sleep wouldn't come. My earlier comfort with being alone in the woods had slipped away. Now I was all too aware how vulnerable I was out here by myself. The treehouse didn't even have a door to close. I sat there for a while, just listening. It was late enough in the summer that in addition to the chirping of the crickets, there was also that ch-ch sound my mom said was katydids. Having a vivid imagination, the noises started to freak me out, reminding me of a horror movie I had accidentally caught a few minutes of. Still, it was super late for a young kid, and my eyelids started dropping. But just as I was about to fall asleep, Jolie sat up and stared at the doorway. She tensed and then barked, her eyes fixed on something out in the dark. Her behavior jacked my heart rate back to Mach 10. My breathing was almost as fast. I managed to sit up and point the flashlight out the door at where she was looking. There was nothing there. I definitely didn't want something to be there, but somehow the fact that there wasn't was worse. I put my hand on her smooth fur, but still she stared at that same spot as if there was something there only she could see. Jolie wasn't the kind of dog that barked for no reason. If she was barking, there was something there, whether I could see it or not. I had been scared before, but now I was terrified. I stared into the darkness, hardly daring to blink. She barked again, the kind of bark she did when a stranger came to the door, low and fierce, the sort of growling bark that always preceded the flash of her teeth. Her feet scrabbled at the wooden floor. Whatever was out there alarmed her enough to have her on the verge of launching out of the treehouse. For several taut minutes, Jolie barked and pierced the darkness with her protective gaze. Finally, with one last growl, she lay down and put her chin on her paws. She continued to gaze out the door, but the tension left her body, and I swallowed and lay back, at last feeling like I could breathe. My body still vibrating with leftover adrenaline, I sat up the rest of the night, and when it got light enough to see without a flashlight, I gathered my things and ran home. I slept late that day, only leaving my room after noon. My mom smiled when she saw me and ruffled my hair. She said she'd been surprised I made it the whole night, that when she was my age she would have been back by 9. Her words about my bravery made me push thoughts about telling her what had happened out of my mind. For the next few weeks, nothing much happened. I continued to play at the treehouse almost every day. I hadn't received another note from Justin, but I continued to leave some for him. Sunset started to get earlier, and I had somewhat forgotten the fear I'd felt being alone in the woods at night, so I asked my mom if I could continue to come home at 8:45, even though it was dark earlier. She okayed that. I had given up on meeting Justin by this point, but I still loved the treehouse and wanted to spend as much time there as possible, since the start of school was only a few weeks away. One evening, just after sunset, I was playing tug-of-war with Jolie when she suddenly dropped her toy and barked. I stumbled back a little, but managed not to fall and looked in the direction she was looking. A small figure came out of the woods. Jolie gave a little growl, but I could see it was a boy about my age, and I shushed her, smiling, just sure it was Justin. Jolie whined a little, but quieted down. I said hi and asked him if he was Justin. He nodded. I asked him where he'd been. He said he'd been away and asked if I wanted to play. I quickly said yes, and we began to play with my action figures. We played until it was time for me to go. After getting his promise to come again tomorrow, I ran home, eager to tell my mom about my new friend. We played every night the next week. I wished Justin could come earlier, but he said he was busy until after sunset. I figured he had chores or something. I didn't ask too many questions because I was just too happy to have a playmate. We played all kinds of games for the next few weeks. Justin particularly liked playing with my action figures. Obi-Wan was his favorite, although he didn't recognize him at first. He said he'd only seen old Obi-Wan. My mom was happy I'd made a new friend. She told me to ask him if he went to my new school, but I always forgot. One day when we were playing, I heard my mom call out to me and saw her walking toward me with a flashlight. She said she came to meet Justin, but when I turned to introduce them, I couldn't see Justin anywhere. After I called for him and he didn't come out, I guessed he'd gone home. I wondered why he hadn't said goodbye, but didn't think about it too long, since Mom said she'd made some brownies and I decided to go home too. The next day, my mom and I went out for school supplies and stopped for ice cream at a local stand that was only open during the summer months. As we got our ice cream, I noticed a faded picture behind the glass. "Hey," I said. "Mom, that's Justin." She looked at the flyer and frowned. "Brett, that can't be Justin. This says the boy in the picture has been missing since 1998. Something flipped in my chest. My pulse tripped wildly in my ears. I knew that was my friend Justin. I swallowed as my brain came to one inescapable conclusion. For the past several weeks, I had been playing with a ghost. School started, and the weather cooled. After taking a break for a few days following this revelation, I continued to play at the treehouse, always hoping and fearing Justin would come. But no matter how late I stayed, I never saw him again. Thanks for listening. Please drop us a like and subscribe. In the following days, look for more stories, both true and fictional, and explorations of all things creepy and unexplained. If you have a story to share, drop an email to the address in the description. Until next time, think twice before you look behind you in the mirror. There may be something on the other side.